This episode is brought to you by Progressive. Progressive helps you compare direct auto rates from a variety of companies so you can find a great one, even if it's not with them. Quote today at Progressive.com to find a rate that works with your budget. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates. Comparison rates not available in all states or situations. Hello and welcome to This Day in Esoteric Political History from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avirgan. This day, March 17th, 1985, U.S. President Ronald Reagan arrives to meet Canadian Prime Minister Brian Mulroney in Quebec City. Now, this came to be known, this meeting between the two, as the Shamrock Summit. They both had Irish backgrounds, and they did start the meeting on St. Patrick's Day. But before I continue with the intro, I just want to lodge a formal complaint with the Historical Event Naming Committee because the Shamrock Summit is really confusing to me. It should include something actually Irish or be in Ireland in some concrete way. I do find it confusing. The Shamrock Summit was a meeting between the U.S. President and the Canadian Prime Minister in Canada. That said, it's a very interesting moment because they do meet at a moment when relations between the two countries are a little shakier than they had been in the past. And I will say that the whole Irish thing did kind of help with the vibes of the meeting, which we will get into. So let's go to Quebec City. It's St. Patrick's Day. Here we are at the Shamrock Summit. And here, as always, Nicole Hammer of Vanderbilt and Kellie Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello there.
Happy St. Patrick's Day.
Hey there.
So I don't know. Do we get to call this an Irish event? Everyone seems to just sort of take that on face value.
No. I mean, even in a diaspora sense, I'm not convinced that Ronald Reagan is Irish.
No. I mean, listen, when you trace his ancestry, his paternal great-grandfather was Irish Catholic. I don't think that's close enough. I don't think Reagan's walking around I'm Irish. I mean, no.
But let's go through the reasons why this is sort of thought of as an Irish event. Maybe listeners in Ireland will tell us what they think. But I will say, we've gotten a couple emails about this, including from a listener named Colin, who's Canadian, who framed this as the Shamrock Summit and pointed out why some of the, the Irishness really did help, and then obviously talked about what this meant for Canada-U.S. relations. But what are the list of reasons that people think of this as an Irish event? So we have it on St. Patrick's Day. Mm-hmm. We do have this notion that Reagan is
nominally Irish.
Nominally Irish. And he finds common cause with Mulroney around this too, right?
Right, because Mulroney, he was born to working-class Irish-Canadian parents. He has these real affinity and relational ties to Ireland. And so it does become this nice space of kind of personal connection between Reagan and Mulroney. Reagan didn't just invent his ancestry in the run-up to this trip. It was something that he leaned into, particularly after he was elected president. And so sometimes just having something in common that doesn't have to do with politics, that doesn't have to do with the tensions between your two countries, that you can kind of joke about and connect over, can make a big difference in the kind of personal diplomacy that presidents engage in. So I do agree that it matters that they had this thing to connect over because it breaks the ice for what could have been more tense discussions.
But one other thing that helps kind of smooth over the interpersonal bonding that has to take place at these kinds of summits, lots of alcohol and good music. And so the big thing here is that this all culminates, before we get to the policy stuff, this all culminates in a moment that is captured on video, which lots of people have sent to us and is kind of remarkable. But it is this ballroom event where Reagan and Mulroney and Nancy Reagan are all swaying back and forth singing When Irish Eyes Are Smiling Together and belting it out. And I'm going to assume there were a few beers or other drinks that led to that moment. But, all good weekend getaways, it culminates in some group singing. And I think that is really the kind of salient moment in this summit. But as we've been saying, it then also has real kind of policy overtones, and they're there ostensibly not just to get drunk and talk about the motherland, but to actually sort of accomplish some things. So what is the state of Canadian-U.S. relations? What are they there to hash out?
Well, I think people don't realize that Canadian-U.S. relations were sort of cold for a while. The relationship that we have today is not something that was taking place in the 1970s. And so Mulroney is really important because one of the things he campaigned on was sort of restoring this relationship with the United States and getting back on good footing and sort of having a relationship that would allow them to make sort of the trade deals that they want to make and show a sense of solidarity. So for the first time, I think you have Mulroney, who's willing to come to the table, and Reagan as well, who has his own set of ideas about what he would like to accomplish. But they are coming together for the first time, I think, in meaningful ways, politically and economically.
And it's worth pointing out that the reason that relations had become so chilled in large part was due to the Cold War and Canada taking a very different approach to Cold War relations with particularly communist countries. So Canada retains ties with Cuba after the Cuban Revolution. It opens up relations with China before the U.S. does. It doesn't join the U.S. as part of the coalition in the Vietnam War, which U.S. presidents take enormous offense at. And so all of these different moments showed the two countries moving further and further apart, so much so that Richard Nixon, when he was president, is so mad at the first Prime Minister Trudeau, Pierre Trudeau, that he says it's time for us to recognize that we have very separate identities, which is something that is a real pushback against what had been deemed a special relationship.
It's a high-stakes election year, so it's not enough to just follow along. You need to understand what's happening so you are fully informed come November. Every weekday on the NPR Politics Podcast, our political reporters break down important stories and backstories from the campaign trail so you understand why it matters to you. Listen to the NPR Politics Podcast wherever you get your podcasts.
Well, that phrase, special relationship, is a real, I think, watchword in Canadian politics. And people have referred to the relationship between the two countries as the quote unquote special relationship. And kind of the state of diplomacy between the U.S. and Canada is often sort of seen about how special is our relationship right now? Are we maintaining the quote unquote special relationship? We've done episodes about, in the 90s, Bill Clinton went to Canada and kind of dipped his toe into the Quebec separatist vote, and that was deemed as a sort of breach of the special relationship. And so it's always navigating this. So you're right to point out that big moment in the early 70s into the mid 70s where Nixon kind of fractures it. That's really what this moment then serves as, is a kind of repairing of that, both on a policy front and a kind of when you use that word special, it's more are the vibes right? To use a very 2024 framing of it.
Well, and there was real effort on Reagan's behalf to get the vibes right, because one of the things that he had campaigned on in 1980 was this idea of a North American Accord, basically a free trade zone between among the U.S., Mexico, and Canada. And this was sort of a precursor to NAFTA. He didn't have a ton of support for it, and it was going to take over a decade of conversations to make this happen. But when he's meeting with Mulroney at the summit, they begin to lay the groundwork for removing some trade barriers, beginning to set the stage for what would become NAFTA in the early 1990s.
Yeah. Let's circle back a little to the kind of summit itself and what was going on during that as we wrap up a little bit. But, everyone's really leaning into the Irish thing, right? Maybe it's just the St. Patrick's Day. But Reagan is wearing a green tie with shamrocks all over it. They talk about their shared Irish heritage during the joint remarks. They have this big gala where they sing "Irish Eyes Are Smiling." There's a lot of other weird stuff too. They do a pageant skit thing, which is kind of bizarre.
It's weird.
But I don't know. These big diplomatic summits are always so strange. Yeah.
2,000 people there. This is a big gala. This is not just, sort of an intimate party, but it's a performance. Everyone is sort of carefully making sure that the way that they engage with one another is always on the up and up. I mean, it really is a balance for everyone who is watching how people engage with one another.
Yes, everyone is being watched at all times. And like you said, Jody, there is this skit. I don't even know how to convey it to our listeners, because it has the sort of outlines of an SNL skit in that it sounds like it's a set of jokes, but I'm not sure that any of them are funny.
Yeah, it's like a pageant skit thing. There's a thing in New York called the Inner Circle Dinner every year, which I've always found a little icky, but it's kind of like where, you know, politicians and journalists and so forth go on and do like really cheesy kind of hacky sketches about current affairs, you know, and it's full of like vaudevillian type jokes and so forth. But there's like this is going on. But, you know, I have no doubt this kills in the room. I'm sure it is great, you know, in 1985 in a ballroom in Quebec City when everyone's Irish eyes are smiling.
Because they just had a lot of Irish beer.
Exactly. So
that helps.
So yes, but it is like, yeah, they're like cracking jokes about the exchange rate and like doing little like, you know, little sketches and so forth. So, you know, and Reagan's sitting there and smiling and so forth. So, but, you know, it also is, this is not right at the beginning of Reagan's term, but, you know, it's fairly early on, I think, as an indication of kind of the way he likes to do these things. I mean, he clearly likes to go and ham it up and, you know, put his arm around world leaders and have these kind of like big, long weekend summits with boozing and drinking and sketches and all that stuff. And we've seen it.
Charming folks and all of that. He knows how to chummy it up to folks.
Yeah, exactly.
He can do that little twinkle in his eye.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think we should leave it there. We did a nice little mix, as was the Shamrock Summit itself. We did a nice little mix of both the silly and the actual policy stuff that they had to accomplish and to repair that relationship. But let's do a few of these also on this days, as we often do. And here we are, March 17th. 1762. This is when New York held its first St. Patrick's Day parade. 1762. I think that's earlier than I would have expected. Although I know obviously Irish immigrants were like a huge force from the jump. But yeah, that is pretty early.
I would have put it in the 19th century for sure.
I would have as well.
But in 1905, Anna Eleanor Roosevelt married Franklin Delano Roosevelt in New York.
NIki, is this the house that you visited?
This is the house that I visited. And I mean, I got two words for you. Power couple.
Yes.
We should do some more Eleanor Roosevelt stuff going forward because she's fascinating.
She is.
It was also on this date in 1966 that a U.S. Navy midget submarine located a missing hydrogen bomb that had fallen from a U.S. Air Force B-52 bomber into the Mediterranean off Spain. I don't think hydrogen bombs should go missing. I think it's a bad idea.
We've done a couple bombs gone missing episodes on this show, but I did not know about this one, and I think we could circle around to it. But we, you know, that one about the bomb in North Carolina that almost blew up half of that region. That still is seared into my memory.
That we have not accidentally set off a nuclear bomb in the last 80 years.
It's a miracle.
Yeah. And then in 1984, Arkansas had switched its primary system from a traditional primary voting to a caucus system, and turnout drops from 450,000 to 22,000, and then they promptly switch back. But I mean, this makes me think of the episode we just recently did about how the primaries are broken and how they kind of exclude the voice of the people, and a lot of it is the media environment, the money, and the divide between the parties, but also a lot of this kind of nuts and bolts stuff of how do we actually vote. And I think that is still an ongoing question and an ongoing thing we should try and fix, is to make voting easier and as accessible as possible. So, but that is a stunning fact. You switch from one system to another, and it goes from 450,000 to 22,000 votes. Good on Arkansas to switch it right back, I suppose. But
Yeah. Actually, not how I expected that story to end. So good job, Arkansas.
All right. We will leave it there. Nicole Hemmer, thanks to you as always.
Thank you, Jody.
And Kellie Carter-Jackson, thanks to you.
My pleasure.
Thanks for listening to This Day in Esoteric Political History. Our researcher and producer is Jacob Feldman. Our producer is Brittany Brown. Our transcripts, which you can find on our website, are done by Kala Nakua. This Day is a proud member of Radiotopia from PRX, a network of independent, creator-owned, listener-supported podcasts. Audrey Martovich is executive producer. Yuri Lasordo is director of operations. If you want to support the show, tell a friend about This Day and become a member of Radiotopia at whatever level works for you. You can do that at our website, thisdaypod.com. Also on our site, you can find transcripts, sign up for our newsletter, find links to follow us on Instagram and Threads, buy merch like shirts and hats and phone cases, find information about our theme song, give feedback on an episode we've done, or suggest topics for a future episode. That and lots more, thisdaypod.com. My name is Jody Abergan. We'll see you soon.
It is, as you may have heard, an election year. But do you feel like you have a lot of choices? Here are the new candidates, same as the old candidates. How did we get here again? The fact is, our democracy is broken. We can all feel it, and there's data to back it up, too. A Princeton University study found that public opinion has near zero impact on what laws are passed. You know what does have an impact, though? Money. You can call it lobbying, you can call it super PAC spending, you can call it corruption. But luckily, there are things we can do right now to fix this broken system. This podcast is part of the Pro-Democracy Podcast Coalition, a group that's banding together to make our democracy better. We're working with Represent Us, the largest grassroots organization fighting to end corruption city by city and state by state. You can join the movement too. Go to represent.us/podcast to find out more.
Radiotopia.